just gently and silently reverse roles. Just gently, you might like to bring yourself back to the room again. When you feel ready, open your eyes and just spend a few moments sharing with each other what you experienced or what happened or what came up, what you felt. Before I explain a bit about that exercise, I find that maybe 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of the people that I work with will sit there again with tears just streaming down their face. Often if you ask them why they were crying, they'll say they don't really know, but it just felt like a tremendous release. When I was younger and less experienced, I used to get embarrassed if I had somebody sitting there crying, because I used to think it was more a sign of pain. I now regard it as a release of pain. And in fact, research recently has suggested that if you cry for emotional reasons, your tears actually contain stress hormones. I reckon, therefore, as another part of the healing process, it's a way that the body has of ridding itself of stress. But I find that once you start doing that part of the exercise, the whole thing starts to change and the whole emphasis starts to change. I think it's primarily because you then start making contact, you're touching. And I believe that touch is a crucial part of healing. And I think that even if you're not doing anything else, even if there's no other intent behind the touch, touch conveys a very powerful message to somebody else. It suggests that you're on their side, that you're rooting for them, that you're not making necessarily any kind of judgment about them. And that's why, for myself, if I'm doing healing, I always feel more comfortable when I'm touching than if I keep my hands off, as I know some healers will tell you. But I think that one of the other reasons that exercise is so useful and sometimes very powerful is simply because it's silent. If you had actually sat there and had gone through verbally all of those things, I don't think it would have the same kind of power. So often, I think, you can be in a situation where you've upset somebody or caused somebody pain, or they've made you angry or caused you pain, and you can go back and try and discuss it, and you can use words. And the more you talk about it and the more you discuss it and the more words you use, the more of a mess you get yourself into. And you think to yourself, I wished I'd never started this conversation in the first place. And I suspect that sometimes just holding someone's hands, sometimes just putting your arm around someone's shoulder, sometimes just giving somebody a hug or embracing them, probably says far more than any number of words that you can use. I think we've got to a point in society where many of us are frightened of silence. We've always got to have something else going on. We've always got to try and express ourselves verbally. I have always said that for me, healing is one of the simplest things in the world. And I'm always a bit saddened when people try and make it sound so complicated and so mysterious and so on. I know that I've always used the example that you've only got to go out on a day like this into the centre of town and see a typical scenario where maybe there are parents with small children. One of the children will trip up the curb and graze its knee and start crying. The mother will very often kneel down, place her hands on the grazed knee and count to 5. And at the count of 5, the pain has magically gone. That mother, so far as I'm concerned, is doing healing. And I've never really been able to understand why healing has to be shrouded with all the sort of ritual and mysticism that so many people seem to feel more comfortable with. If that's the way you do it, fine, if that's what works for you. But for myself, I've always tried to strip it right down, because I think if you can strip it right down, it's easier to understand. And I think probably then anybody can latch onto it and say, well, yeah, I can follow that. When I work with somebody, I always use both hands. I've always believed that each of my hands has a different role or a different function. I can't prove this, it's just something I feel. I've always felt that the healing energy flows through my left hand and that I use my right hand to direct it or to guide it. Often when I work with somebody, I get very strong sensations. The most common experience that I get is one of a sensation of very considerable heat. The recipient often reports that it's like having a heating pad placed on them, or that it's like sitting near an electric fire. It's that kind of radiated heat. I also get a sensation, very often, rather like mild electricity or tingling in my hands. Now, curiously, when I've done, years ago, research at London University, I did an experiment where I had thermocouples attached to my hands, and I was then putting my hands on somebody and working with them. And even when I felt there was considerable heat, and so did the other person, the thermocouples registered absolutely no change at all in temperature, which makes me think that the warmth or the heat that people often describe when reporting a healing experience is probably not coming from the healer's hands. I believe that what one is doing is somehow channeling some form of energy, and I think the heat is more a manifestation of an energy transfer, if you like. I've got a number of exercises that I want to lead you through, some of which are my exercises, some of which have evolved out of other people's exercises over the years. But I wanted just to start at a very simple point and start working through, and I'll show you how quickly you can get something going as well, how quickly you can get something happening. Let me just say also, before I start on these exercises, don't get hooked on the idea that you should feel or experience what I've just described. That happens to be personal to me. I know some people who practice healing who are very good, but they never particularly feel anything at all. I've heard of some people who experience coldness rather than warmth. So don't get stuck on the idea that your hands should suddenly heat up. Also, the sensation that I want you to experience is not like sticking your fingers in a plug socket. It's something, it's something much more subtle than that. And you might think for the first exercise or two, I don't know what he's going on about, I can't feel anything at all. And then suddenly realize by the third exercise that in fact there is something going on. Ah, that's what he was meaning. What I'd like you to do is, if you've got anything on your laps, just put it on the floor for a moment so your hands and your laps are free. When I work, I tend to work a lot with imagery. I get a lot of images going through my mind. And I should point out that the imagery which I refer to, the images which I get in my head, are not premeditated. They are totally spontaneous. So I don't sit there thinking to myself, what image can I use to heal this, that, or the other? It just occurs to me spontaneously. But I find that when I'm thinking about healing energy, nearly always I get an image of white light. And that's something which seems to be common with a lot of people who practice healing, often that people see it in terms of white light. Sometimes I imagine that white light rather like sparks of electricity that jump from one hand to another. Sometimes more like a sort of gentle wave motion. Sometimes I imagine it more like a sort of giant laser beam that permeates right through the patient's body. But just experience what you can do now. I don't mind whether you keep your eyes open or closed, but I'd like you just to pick your hands up, hold them in front of you with your palms facing one another. And I'd like you, as you hold your hands there, to imagine that something which to you represents or symbolizes healing energy is flowing from one hand to the other. Now you might use the sort of image which I've just described of sparks or a wave motion or whatever. Just imagine some sort of energy flowing between your hands. And as you do so, I'd like you to start slowly drawing your hands closer together. Draw them closer and closer together until you've got them maybe just 1 inch or so apart, till you've got them a couple of centimetres apart. When you've got them a couple of centimetres apart, just hold them there and be aware of what you sense or can feel. Then move your hands apart again. And once more, start drawing them back closer together again. When you've done that a couple of times, just keep moving your hands then at whatever speed seems comfortable, or you can move the position of your hands. And just be aware of what you sense or feel. The sensation that I think probably a number of you are going to get quite quickly is one almost as if you're playing with magnets. You may get a sensation as if your hands are now either repelling, some of you may find it's more of a sensation of being attracted to one another. Sometimes people have described it as feeling like a sort of heavy or leathery bubble between their hands, giving a kind of bouncing. You may also find that one or both hands start to get warm or tingle. And that may actually go right up to your elbows. Then you can leave that exercise. Did anybody get a sensation of like magnets or bouncing or whatever? Now if you experienced something just now, I'll show you now how you can really amplify it, because what you were doing there was completely mechanical. All you're doing is really just thinking about something. There's no other real intent behind it. This is how to really transform it and get closer, I believe, to that healing touch. What I'd like you to do is this time sit with your hands open in your lap, and And I'm going to ask you to close your eyes, because I want you to think about something specific, and I want you just to cut out external visual distractions. I'd like you to sit, as I say, with your hands open in your lap, and I'd like you to think about somebody who you really love. Get in your mind an image of someone that you love. For a little while, I'd like you to send out your thoughts of love to them. Imagine that love perhaps flowing from you to them in the form of light again. Imagine perhaps that person being surrounded with light. Imagine them smiling as they receive your thoughts of love. And as you focus on that, just be aware now of any associated ideas, thoughts, impressions, or maybe colours. What do you feel when you think of love? Imagine now that love, that healing energy flowing down your arms and out through your hands and fingertips. Imagine it flowing out as streamers of light. White light, golden light. And as you imagine that love flowing now through your hands, just be aware of what you sense or what you feel in your arms and hands. Maybe keeping your eyes closed, just gently lift up your hands and once more, as you were doing in the last exercise, move them backwards and forwards at whatever speed seems comfortable to you, and just experience what happens. Just imagine now that healing energy, that love, flowing from one hand to the other. See if the experience, see if what you feel, subjectively at least, is different in any way to what you experienced the first time. again bring yourself back to this room. Did anybody notice a difference? What was the change? Wider? Bigger? Your hands were warmer? Someone else saying it's warmer? Usually what you find is that it seems to really just amplify or almost focus what was happening the first time. And it's as if somehow it comes through much more clearly. I've always said that it's rather like having a radio set. The first time you think you've tuned into the radio station, it's not until you do it the second time you realise how much distortion and disturbance there was the first time. Mostly, though, people find that the second time, once they're putting love into it, they often say that it feels difficult to get their hands close together. It's as if somehow the energy is much bigger, much wider than it was the first time. What's also interesting is watching you doing it. Because first of all, it's much gentler when you do it the second time. When you do that exercise the first time, you were doing it quite mechanically. As soon as you start putting love into it, the whole flow of your hands, your movement changes. It becomes much softer. And you get, I think, closer to the feel of what goes on during healing. Also, what's nice is looking around and seeing the number of you sitting there with great big smiles on your faces. It's something that often happens when I'm working with somebody, that I find I've got a big smile on my face. And if there's anybody in the room with myself and with the patient, they must think that I'm a real oddball, sitting there smiling at their sick friend or relation. And it's not actually that at all. It's just that that's often how healing makes me feel. It puts a smile on my face. People often think that... or often say to me, well, don't you get tired by the end of the day? And I have to say that I don't, no. I find on the contrary, healing actually tends to energize me and leave me in the same state as hopefully I've been able to leave the patient. And I always feel that it's simply because I'm channeling something through me rather than the energy coming directly from me. I think people in this country at the moment don't realize how fortunate they are, in that at this point healing still remains legal, and if you're a patient in a hospital, you can, under most normal circumstances, ask that a healer come and visit you. The healer is allowed in during visiting hours. The situation in many other parts of the world is very different. As many of you will know, the situation in Europe is, for example, very different, and in Europe healing is still illegal. The most interesting situation of all occurs, I always think, in America, where technically healing remains illegal in every state, especially if you're getting any kind of remuneration for it. However, you can, in America, practice healing quite legally without any kind of restraint, so long as you are working within the framework of a religion. And all you have to do to satisfy that criteria is to send as little as $10 to an address in Los Angeles, or it used to be $10. You then get back a certificate which says you're the Reverend whoever you are, and you can practice healing with immunity. And for $25, apparently, you can become a bishop. So that's why, invariably, when you hear of American healers, they're always Reverend this or Reverend that. That's how they have to skirt the law and work within it. And one wonders, in fact, if that is what will happen in this country in 1992, when the laws are being, and I love this phrase, in quotes, harmonized. Because it could well be at that point that if Britain takes on the lead of all the other European countries, that we find suddenly that we're breaking the law by practicing healing. And it could well be that in order to practice healing, one has to be part of a religious organization. Who knows? However, having run the Americans down, some of the best work, I believe, in healing has come over the last 10 or 15 years out of the States and not out of Britain. I find it quite interesting because when I used to work in the States, Americans used to have this image that all healing advances came from Britain. And I think many Americans had this idea that early in the morning, doctors and healers would wander around the wards together, examining patients and comparing notes and so on. We know differently. But as I say, some of the best work, some of the most interesting work, I think, has come out of the States. There's a lady who, until recently, was a professor of nursing at New York University, a lady called Dolores Krieger. And for, I think, about 15 years, she taught a course at New York University for nurses called very simply the therapeutic touch. That was basically a euphemism for healing because healing didn't have legal status. She has written what I consider to be one of the best books on the subject of healing, called very simply the therapeutic touch. I've always recommended that book because it does away with the gobbledygook and the mysticism. It's very straightforward. It's got lots of good exercises in it for developing healing potential. And at the back of the book, for those who are of a more scientific inclination, there are several appendices made up of the reports of the work that she and her nurses carried out. They discovered, for example, that nurses who practiced the laying on of hands with patients were able to increase hemoglobin levels. Hemoglobin, as you probably know, is the agent that carries oxygen through the bloodstream. Early on in her book, though, Dolores Krieger says that there are 3 conditions which we have to be able to meet or attain in order to become what she calls a helpful healer. And I wanted just to draw your attention to these 3 points because I totally agree with them, and I think it is quite a good point at which to start healing. The first thing that Dolores Krieger says is that it's not sufficient that we simply want to heal. She said if that were the case, anybody with a sick child would be able to help that sick child. I actually would question that because for myself, and I can only give you my experience, I find if I try and work with anybody with whom I've got any kind of emotional linkage or connection, it's as if some giant door comes down or shuts down on me and nothing happens. Maybe it's because to do healing effectively, you've got to be doing it for selfless reasons and motives. Maybe I think in my mind that if I'm working with someone close to me or someone with whom I've got an emotional bonding, that an element of selfishness enters into it, and the whole perspective of the healing then becomes changed. But Dolores Krieger goes on to say that there are 3 conditions which we have to meet. The first one, she says, is intentionality. You must know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what your motivation is. And I think that's a very interesting point. What makes you want to heal? Why are you interested in healing? She explains in her book that healing can become a power tool. I know what she means because I have seen in other countries, certainly, people who claim to be healers, and it's more as if they're on some sort of ego trip, and it's sort of like they're up on a pedestal and they want everybody else to say, wow, that guy's something special, he's a healer. I would actually, for myself, again, somewhat disagree on that point because believing that I am only a channel, I would have thought that if that healing energy was abused, that the source would either get weakened or would cut off anyway. But anyway, the first point she mentions is intentionality. What is your motivation? Somebody once said, and I think this is one of the best questions to ask yourself right at the beginning of healing, do you want to do healing because you want love? Do you do healing because you have love to share? And I think if you can honestly say that it's because you have love to share, your motivation is correct. I think that if you're doing healing because you want love from other people, then maybe it's not the same sort of motivation. Somebody also said, and I think this is lovely, that most people are drawn to healing because they recognize that there's a part of themselves that needs healing at some level. And I must say, I've experienced tremendous sort of changes within myself that I'm sure would never have occurred if I hadn't been involved in this work in the first place. Don't ever think, if you practice healing, that you're just blasting away at someone else. I always perceive it very much as a two-way communication, that I'm picking up, I'm learning as much from that person as I hope they are from me. The second point that Dolores Krieger mentions is motivation in the interests of the patient. That one, I believe, is completely self-explanatory. I don't believe that ultimately you can help somebody unless you are motivated to do so. You can't heal somebody unless you're motivated to do so. I also believe, probably like you, that there are some people who quite unwittingly have a healing quality about them. You may know somebody and you've only got to be around them for a short period of time and you come away feeling really inspired and almost energized. There are other people that I call psychic vampires. You've only got to be around them for about 5 or 10 minutes and you sort of crawl away on your hands and knees with absolutely no energy whatsoever. And I think often those people that have got that healing quality are probably drawn towards certain occupations. I think there are many wonderful doctors, for example, that have got that sort of quality. I think many nurses have that quality. There are all sorts of people that just exude that. The third point that Dolores Krieger mentions is to have not only an ability to confront yourself, but also the willingness to do so. And I think there are too often situations where somebody, because they can heal, believes that they have a direct hotline to God, and that because they've got a direct hotline to God, they're much more spiritually evolved than anybody else. So there's never anything wrong with them. It's always somebody else's problem. And as I said a moment ago, I regard that healing process as being a two-way road, that I'm learning as much from that person in front of me as hopefully they are from me. And I think it is important to have the willingness to be able to look at yourself and to be able to confront your own weaknesses, as well as sometimes maybe your strengths. I wanted, though, to go back to this idea that Dolores Krieger mentions in that second point, and that is motivation in the interests of the patient. And when I said that there are some people who have just got that quality of energy, there's an exercise that I'd like to try and get you to have a go at in a moment. This is going to be quite interesting, because I think we've got so many people in here. I think some of our auras may get a bit tangled up, but nevertheless, you can get the gist of what I'm wanting you to do. I feel everybody has around them an energy field. Some people refer to that as an aura. It's one and the same thing. I use that energy field very, very extensively when I work with somebody. It tells me a lot about, for example, where to place my hands when I work with somebody. It tells me areas of energy imbalance and so on. That energy field around somebody responds very quickly to thought, to emotions, to health, and so on. And anybody that doesn't believe in energy fields, anybody that doesn't believe in auras, there's a lovely little exercise that you can sometimes do. You may have seen this yourself. If you stand talking to somebody, take one step towards them and watch them take one step back. And it's as if they're saying, "You're in my energy field, get out of it." And I think we do all have that aura or energy field around us. And there are very few people we will actually allow to penetrate through that and to come through the barrier and to get that close to us. I think also that energy can permeate into buildings. And again, I'm sure you know that there are some buildings that you can go into that just have a wonderfully warm, welcoming feel. Other buildings you just want to get out of as fast as you can. And I think that energy from us actually permeates into inanimate objects as well. I find people say, well, how do you recharge? I find that one of the greatest ways of gaining energy, one of the greatest ways of recharging, and again, I'm sure some of you know this, go and find a really huge tree. And if you stand near a huge tree, I don't know whether it's my imagination or not, but it's as if you can just feel energy pulsing or pumping out of it. And I always find that trees and forests are one of the best places for me to actually sort of rejuvenate and to get energy back again. What I'd like you to do in a moment is this little exercise. I want you to find somebody, preferably somebody you don't know, because I want you to work on this exercise intuitively rather than logically. If you work with someone that you know, you're going to be thinking, oh, I know what they'll think in this situation. If you work with someone you don't know, you're forced then into doing it much more from feeling and from intuition. I want one of you to act as a sender and one of you to act as a receiver. And I'll just give you a little demonstration so you can see exactly what I mean. Can I just borrow you, Jane? Because Jane's done this exercise many, many times before and knows, therefore, what I'm going to do. What I'm going to do is to ask Jane to either think about her normal, positive, loving, happy thoughts, or alternatively, to think about something that makes her feel really angry, hostile, wild, jealous, or whatever. So either something which is essentially negative or something which is basically positive. I don't know which it's going to be. What I'm going to do, though, is to get Jane not only to think about that, but also just to put her hands up in front of her, okay? And what I'm going to do, I'm going to close my eyes so I can't see what I'm doing, and I'm just going to move towards Jane with my eyes closed. And it doesn't matter whether Jane's got her eyes open or closed, but I'm going to move towards her with my eyes closed, and with my hands, I'm just going to try and sense the energy field around her. And at this point here, I know I can just feel I've walked straight into something. I'm not going to tell you what, because otherwise it programs you into thinking you should feel exactly the same. But at this point here, that to me is as if I've got my hands now almost against some sort of window. So I open my eyes and I see how far apart we still are. But at that point I can really feel something quite strongly. So now I'm going to move back again, and I'm going to get you to just reverse your thoughts and think exactly the opposite of whatever you were doing just now. And I'm now going to start moving forward again, just with my hands sensing, trying to sense that energy field.
You can see what's happened. And I can't feel anything now until I'm virtually hand to hand with Jane. It's as if suddenly that's been retracted. It's literally that close now. So you can see that something's happened. That energy field has changed very, very quickly, just through Jane reversing her thoughts from one direction to another. When you've done that, just reverse roll so you both get a chance at sending and receiving. Thanks. And one final thing with this exercise, don't go into it thinking that there is a right and a wrong answer. There is neither right nor wrong. I just want you to experience something, to feel something. When you've finished, when you've worked at it both ways round and you've told each other what it was you were thinking and how the other person responded to it, just sit down again. Off you go, see what you can do.